So I'm joined now by Ken Ehrlich, the president of Ken Ehrlich Productions and the 40-year executive producer of the Grammys. Ken, welcome.
Thanks, Josh. It's great to see you and be with you, and to be a part of this great events that you're having at back in Athens, Ohio.
Yeah, thanks for taking time to be with us today and to interview some of our artists for the keynotes later on in the program. So I was thinking about the last time I saw you was from afar, January 2020 at the rehearsal for the Grammys. It feels like another world
It
coming
was the
from.
world. I mean, we've had a century in between last January and today. It's
Yeah,
pretty uh, brain shaking and earth shaking. Really something.
yeah.
We're
So
both.
what's life been like in your world? What have you been working on since I guess over the course of the past year or so?
Um, we did one show. Because everything shut down, as you know, right after the Grammys, we did the 2 hour Prince show that we did 2 nights later, and it took me about I was editing with that show for about 3 weeks. So we were in the end of February, first part of March, and then there was nothing. I mean, we just kind of shut down. I got a call to do a show that we did in May, a CBS 2 hour with Harry Connick. It was about the essential workers, and it was a road trip that took him from Connecticut, where he lives, down to New Orleans, where he's from. And it was not an easy show to do. We interviewed essential workers on the way down, and then we shot for 3 days in New Orleans. And when I say we shot, I was entirely remote. I was doing a show that I was basically zooming and FaceTiming about every day, at least 3 or 4 hours a day. And then when we got to New Orleans, we had about 3 or 4 location shoots, probably more than that, 5 or 6. So it was complicated. And it basically got me to the point where I said, I don't think I can do this like this. So I stopped down until around September, maybe October, not completely, but I was doing some writing. And then around October, I realized I'm not cut out to sit here. I'd moved. We still had the office, and I was still going into our office. We shut that office down right after the first of the year. We're doing everything remote now, and I've been the last probably since the first of the year, been doing some writing, putting together some pitches. We've got some shows that we're going to take out soon. But it's a different world. So I'm enervated. I think that's the right word, or energized, one of the two. And that's for the coming future.
So let me see if we can go back a bit because you're an Ohio University grad. So what would you say, like, if you could just give us a quick synopsis of what your time at OU was like and how that prepared you for the roles that you took on with the Grammys throughout the past 4 decades?
Well, if the last 14 months have been life changing, my 4 years at OU were even more life changing. And I'll be candid, and I hope this helps some of the kids that are watching this. I did not have a very successful high school career. I wanted to go. There were other schools that I wanted to go to that I didn't get into. And in those days, because OU was and still is, I imagine, a state school, although the requirements are much different now. In those days, they kind of had to take you if you lived in state, and I was from Cleveland. So I had expectations about what going to college was going to be like, but I had no idea that it was going to be as life affirming and life changing as it was. I got into what was then a journalism sequence kind of early. I had some great professors that I really enjoyed being in class with and listening to, including the legendary L.J. Horton, whose name I imagine graces some buildings or something now. But he was at kind of the tail end of his years there. But as important as classwork was, it was the social experience, and it was the campus, and it was this kind of really unique atmosphere of friendliness and sociability and acceptance. And again, this was 50 years ago, something around there. Yeah. But it was a wonderful 4 years, and it really did change my life. I gained a lot of confidence that I didn't have when I got there. I had some good friends. I joined the Jewish fraternity, but most of my friends were probably not Jewish, and it was that kind of a campus. And I'm not going to venture a guess as to what it's like now, but I know that in those days it was a pretty remarkable place to be.
So you leave OU. What does the trajectory look like from your campus experience to your first year with the Grammys?
Oh, it's bouncing around again. This is a good life lesson for kids who want to do what I do or be in some sort of the entertainment world. I went to Chicago. I worked for a series of PR businesses, writing press releases and doing PR for companies. And then at one point, I had some real estate accounts, and I actually had a couple of entertainment. I had a couple of clubs and things. But I realized not only didn't I like it, I really wasn't very good at it. And that's a pretty good thing to figure out early. Uh, Kind of as a sideline, I wound up doing PR for a black jazz radio station. And the guy that was on it was a white Jewish disc jockey named Marty Fay. And he had been on television in the 50s. And he was coming back with a weekly show on this UHF station on Saturday nights from 10 to midnight in the same studio where Soul Train was in the afternoon. And he one day he just came up to me and said, "How'd you like to produce my TV show?" He saw I was a kid, I was hungry, I was going to work for $75 a week as a freelance. And so I started doing that. I don't know, toward the end of the '60s, and that led me to Channel 11, the PBS station in Chicago. And I was there for 4 years, and I started a show called Soundstage there. Well, actually, at one point, I was kind of in charge of PR and fundraising and development. And Soundstage really started as a fundraising show. So I did that, and then I wound up with an agent in Chicago who then was transferred, William Morris agent, who was transferred out to LA, and he kept hitting on me. You got to come out to LA. You got to live here. You got to be here. This is your destiny. And I was kind of happy in Chicago. The show that I did was a network PBS show, and I had somewhat of a notoriety, and I was by no means the king of Chicago, but I had a place there. And finally, I just said, okay, and I came out here. I took some meetings. 1976, we moved out here with two little kids. I had a series of shows. I did the Midnight Special for a year or so. I did a couple of specials. I did a special with Ringo Starr and did the first ever Billboard Awards show. And then in 1980, I got my shot to do the first Grammy Awards. And from then on, it was, among other shows, I might add, that was not my whole year, but it was certainly the calling card from 1980 until I saw you a year and a couple months ago. So
amazing. Yeah. So take us back to that first year. Like, what was 1980? What was that night like for you? What stands out to you in that first experience? Like you said, when you got your shot at music's biggest night.
It was awesome. Sometimes I find it hard to believe. I call it was my 4D night because I had Dionne Warwick, Bob Dylan, the Doobie Brothers, and Neil Diamond and Barbra Streisand. So that's the way I can remember it these days. And they all came with different things. I had done the Doobie Brothers on Soundstage. So I knew them, and that was a big year for them. 1980. It was What a Fool Believes, and they were big then. Dionne Warwick had also done. I had done a PBS show with her. The Doobie Brothers, Neil Diamond, Dylan, the big one was. He had done a soundstage. We did a tribute to John Hammond. So I had met him then. So I already knew three of those people, and I had never worked with Neil or Barbara. But obviously, when they walked out unannounced to sing "You Don't Bring Me Flowers," that was the beginning of quote Grammy moments for them. I had been doing Grammy moments on soundstage since 1974. But it was charmed. I think it was the first year we did the show at the Shrine, or it might have been the second year after it had been at a much smaller venue. The show just started to grow then. It was 2 hours then. 4 years later, when we hit the 25th anniversary, we expanded it to 3, then to 3.5. It just kept growing, and it gained credibility. Not to say anything bad about what it was before me, but it was it wasn't really credible. It was a very middle of the road music show that honored a lot of the right people, but didn't really get acts that. I think the biggest act at one point I think they did have. I think who was it that presented together? It might have been Paul Simon and
Oh,
Lennon.
it was John Lennon. Yeah, that's right.
Lennon. But other than that, they're really, and it's not fair to say, but it was a Barry Manilow type show. That's what,
Yeah. Okay, wait. So unpack that term, that phrase, the Grammy moment, like for people that aren't aware of what you're referring to.
it's pretty simple. You can't generalize because there are all kinds, but basically it started when I was in Chicago, and one of the early sound stages, we would book 2 acts a show, and I had no money. And so what I would do would be to go to the acts and say, I need you to do 12 minutes in the middle of this 1 hour show that bridges the first act to the second act. Most of them said yes. Some of them said no. I'm very proud, that quite recently, unfortunately, we lost Chick Corea, and I put him together with Herbie Hancock for the first time. They had both played with Miles Davis, but they had never played together. So I had them, and then there were all kinds of things. I had Dion and Phil Everly write a song on the show. There were all kinds of gags that we did, and they were moments. When I got to LA, when I started doing the Grammys, all of a sudden it just started expanding, and there were no limits. And what I found was that a lot of the acts that I talked to were open to doing things. By then the AMAs were on the air. There might have been MTV was starting then, and all they wanted, those other shows wanted, was hits. They just said, "Come on, do the hit." And obviously the record companies like that, but I didn't necessarily like that. I wanted them to do something that was interesting, and the acts themselves wanted that. So often, not all the time. Well, we didn't have in those days 14 or 15 Grammy moments, but it wound up that each successive year we would probably I just had both a mandate and I had a passion for expanding the boundaries. So there were several shows where you didn't know which Grammy moment was your favorite because there were a bunch of them. So
go ahead.
That's it.
Yeah. So let me go a little further on that. So when was the first time that you kind of pushed for something that you thought, you're kind of seeing if two things would work together? You mentioned from 1980, but beyond that, when did you really hit something that just sparked and you really felt it both live and also in kind of the reception that you got after the telecast?
I don't remember, Josh. I think I know one of the early ones, probably it might have been in the late 80s. We started doing not just two people together, but broader. And I think there was a blues thing that I did at one point that Steve Cropper helped me put together. And it was BB, and it was Albert King, and it was Etta James, and it was Dr. John, and I think it might have been John Lee Hooker. I don't remember. But, up until that point, the powers that be, both at the network and at the Academy, were reluctant to do numbers that were longer than 3.5 minutes. The show was a series of 4-minute performances. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't do justice to something like that in that amount of time. So I just started expanding the boundaries. And I think that one might have been 6.5 or 7. And then I did others that were that long. And then one year I had Long Long and Herbie Hancock together doing Rhapsody in Blue. And, the full version of that is 12 or 14 minutes. And I cut it down to 7. So ultimately, we started just expanding the boundaries. And I wish I could remember some of the others that were early. We did a country one at some point around, I think the country one was after the turn of the century. But a bunch of them were early, and they were just expanded, and they covered a lot of territory.
Well, yeah, I remember that when the soundtrack for A Brother Where Art Thou swept that year. Yeah, that was at 99. Yeah, that was. I mean, yeah. Well, it's funny, I think about this last January. Being there, on TV, you kind of get a sense like there are times when the music industry and just you just sense like something has fundamentally just changed. Like I think about that "Oh brother, where art thou" moment. Like something changed then. There's been many points in this last year. You know, you're gonna be talking with Phineas here later today, but that moment when it's like, oh, somebody that produced an album in their bedroom just is up here sweeping all these awards to make this amazing album, and it's like the world's changed. You know, you kind of get a sense like the Grammys kind of becomes this demarcation line between two different eras. What's that been like to be over the course of so many changes and to see art and music just be transformational throughout that time?
What I always said to people when I had these kind of conversations with them was that I wanted the show to be both reflective of what had happened, what was happening, but I also wanted it to be, I wanted it to lead. I wanted us, when we could, to be maybe not first, but in that first wave of things that were changing. I know, we've been criticized, the show was criticized for getting into the hip hop world late, and it's probably true. But I was always making I was always making a show for CBS for many years, for all I know, it still does, had the oldest demographic of the broadcast networks. NBC was younger, ABC was younger, and Fox was much younger. So I had that mandate to deal with too, and I needed to pay attention to it. But the challenge was to kind of combine those things so that we could do both. And I think we may not have hit our stride with that until after 2000, until after 9/11. We tried. I mean, there were some things that we were doing, but I think there was some kind of new blood. There was a mandate, and the show had always done well ratings wise. All ratings are down. We're never going to do a 46 share like we did some years in the early years that I was doing it, or at least a 30 share. But once I had a few years under my belt, the network had its confidence in me. The Academy kind of did. They were always looking over my shoulder, and they were always not necessarily. They were supportive, but they were proprietary. So I had to watch it, and I couldn't do all the things I wanted to do, but for the most part, they allowed me to express my creative juices, which basically were an extension of the creative juices of the artists that we worked with.
Well, I think about that. I mean, the few years just after 9/11, one of the great performances that you helped orchestrate was the Prince Beyonce combination. Can you talk a little bit about like what does the process look like to have something like that come together?
Well, by that time, honestly, we really had hit our stride, and every year there were a half a dozen new acts that came to the show. I'm being general, but probably about that. But then there were people that came back. I had been working with Beyonce for at least, I don't know when I had my first Destiny's Child show, but it was in the late 90s. I know that. Prince I had on the show in 1985, I think, and then again in 93. So I had, they were used to me. I was used to them. That particular performance was, Beyonce was nominated all over the place that year. And I did not have an easy time convincing her to do this. She said to me, very, very, as only Beyonce could say, "Hey, Ken, why can't I just come on your show and do, Dangerously in Love? That's what I want to do. We have this great idea. We're going to do a picture frame and doves are going to fly out and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "No, I want you to, by that time I had talked to Prince, and Prince said, "I'll do the Grammys this year, but I want to do it with Beyonce." I said, "Okay, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good offer. Let me see if I can make it happen." So he was in before she came. And then I had to wear her down. I wound up going down to some photo shoot one night, and her mother, who I knew was there. And I first got her mother on our side, and then I sat with her, and I wound up giving giving her a second spot, which I had never done to anybody on the show because I wanted it so bad. I I wanted to open that show with the two of them. It was just too, I couldn't pass it up. So it was epic. And the one-liner there is that after I called him back and confirmed it with him, he said, okay, give me a day. And then he called me the next day. He was in town. He was rehearsing. And so he said, can you come out to the rehearsal place? And I said, yeah. Come around 6:30. And I went out there with no expectation. He was mysterious because he was always mysterious. And I walked in and he said, come on in. And I walked into a rehearsal room and he's there. The whole band is set up. I recollect they might have even been in wardrobe. And he said, sit down. And it was me and David Wild. And he said, he didn't say another word, just went over, picked up the guitar, and he ran through the entire medley, which in 24 hours he had laid out. He knew his part. He knew what he wanted her to do. And that was 90% of what you saw on the show 3 weeks later. That's just the way he was. He was remarkable.
Amazing.
Went on to work with him a few other times. There was only one like that.
Another Grammy performance I want to see if I can get some insight in is how you orchestrated, just because, Daft Punk has officially disbanded, and, that 2014 performance with Pharrell, Stevie Wonder, Nile Rodgers, like, how did that come about? What did those conversations look like?
I think we had already had them on the show before then. I think I had them on with Kanye before that. You can check it out. So by then I kind of knew them, although you never really knew them. Those masks and they hid more than just their faces. So I'm sorry, hold on, I don't want to ring all of them. There was an intermediary, a really good guy who we worked with, who was a translator as well as, and we just kind of laid it out. Pharrell was a big part of that process. Nile Rodgers was a big part. Stevie came into it late. I think there was another component. There was somebody else that was involved. I don't remember, but it was, and in all fairness, the label was a huge supporter of that. And it really had to do with, that was the one I think we built the recording studio room for. And the shock of the reveal of the two guys behind the glass window that was down and then, was pretty amazing. Stevie walked in about 15 minutes before we were ready to go, as Stevie is wont to do. And it was pretty remarkable. It was great. The song was great. It was a huge record that year. It was Get Lucky, right? Is that what it was?
Yeah, it was like Get Lucky. It was a medley too.
Oh yeah,
I think Freak Out was in there.
It turned. Yeah, Nile did that. Nile basically laid that out. It went from Get Lucky into Stevie into Another Star, and they loved that. So it was magical, and we all we really were. There are some of these where I'll sit in the room that I'm sitting in right now at home in my home office, and I'll lay out the whole thing. I mean, if you remember, last year was it the year before where we did this 7-minute Dolly tribute segment, and I had 5 acts and 6 songs and whatever. I laid that out here, sitting here, just listening to Dolly songs. That was a couple of years ago. But that year, it was basically some conversations with Nile, some conversations with Pharrell, a little bit of talk with Stevie, but then it just kind of like trust in the talent and they'll deliver. Trust is a big word in my vocabulary.
Yeah, and there's an interesting thing I noticed recently. I mean, just before we talked, I've just been looking at some past performances, and there's a great video of the rehearsal of that, because I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit, but I don't know if everybody knows, but you had the entire run of show go before the show itself, so you would run the whole thing live, right? And so that particular performance, I saw Paul McCartney came out just to see the rehearsal because he was such a big fan of the song and the artist. And there's a moment in the video that's caught where you're coming down the aisle to go up to the stage, and McCartney sees it's you, and it's like he's running to an old friend. And he's just and you both just are so overjoyed to see each other. Like, it's so great to run into each other. And to me, it just really spoke about the trust that you have built with artists, that it's like it's very familial almost.
don't remember that moment, but I can tell you this: that you know, I was at Ohio University when the Beatles first broke. So all my life, the Beatles and Paul and Ringo and George and John were my idols. So, you know, to have had the adventures that I've had, mostly with Paul, a little bit with Ringo. I never met John. I did meet George once or twice. Um, we did a tribute to John that I was very proud of about a month after 9/11. I did it with Yoko. And we did, originally was just going to be a tribute to John. And when 9/11 happened, we decided very quickly that we were going to go on with the show because, as Yoko put it, John would have wanted us to. And we turned the show into a tribute to New York City, into John Lennon and his love for New York City. And it was pretty powerful, the whole show. But the Beatles are the Beatles. You know, I mean, okay, sorry, Mick. You know, I mean, I love the Stones and really enjoyed working with them. We did a pay-per-view with them, and I had Mick on the Grammys and a couple of other things. But my life, my through line is through certainly for 20 years, and then afterward with the individuals, you know, all the way through. So I don't recall that moment, but in my memories are some really wonderful times with Paul McCartney, where he's been extremely gracious and nice to me.
Yeah. Do you get us going back to kind of how you map things out and going through then the kind of conceptualization, the rehearsal, and then obviously the broadcast? Like, do you get a sense in those moments of what's really going to hit? You know, I think about like last year, the Tyler the Creator performance. I think about 2016 with Kendrick Lamar doing All Right, and just having this incredible kind of response to that. Like when you're there and you kind of see these things coming together, do you get a sense of like, oh yeah, this is going to be the moment that's going to really kind of be remembered from this night?
Sometimes I don't at all. I don't know, after you've been doing it this long, you kind of get a sense of, at least you'd like to think you understand an audience and you understand what the dynamic of performance is. I'm trying to think of one that got me that I didn't expect. I think I love the song. I didn't know it was going to register. What did Brandy Carlisle do? I don't want to mix her up with Casey Musgrave. Casey Musgrave did Rainbow a few years ago, but Brandy did, what's the name of the song? The big hit song a couple of years ago. And I loved the song, and I booked it early, and I knew what I wanted to do. I had told her I wanted to write out the verses, the choruses. But and I thought, okay, this is going to be good. It turned out to be great because of how great she is, and because of the simple production that we did. We didn't try and overdo it. Come on, Josh, help me. What's the name of it?
I think it was the title track of that album. It's escaping me at the moment, but I watched that performance. It's amazing. It's completely amazing. It's just such a pure performance.
So that was one that just, you know, I don't want to say it snuck up on me, but, and I guess I kind of had a better sense of it when we got it on stage. But, you know, there's some that, again, I sit here when I've laid out the show and I say, this is a standing ovation. This is a standing ovation. This probably isn't. As far as Kendrick, yeah, I knew. I mean, that was a can't miss. And Tyler, I think, you know, I was just taken with him. I had seen him. I never put an act on the show that I hadn't seen live, and I went to see him. He was kind of booked, but we weren't firm. And about a month before the show, he was in San Diego, and we took a run down there to see his live show. And I loved the show. I thought he was dynamic and really interesting. And then it just got better and better and better. And I knew going in, which is why I think I programmed it kind of early in the show, which I normally didn't do with hip hop. Again, our older audience seemed to me that I needed to ease them into it. So this one I think I had in the first 20 minutes of the show because it was so exciting. You didn't have to be a hip hop fan to get that number and to see the uniqueness of Tyler as an artist. So Yeah, it varies, but you have your automatics, and then you have the ones that you hope will do that. Will surprise you.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really taken aback by at the rehearsals last year that I don't think a viewing audience realizes, but at least the way you had it set up last year, which I think is indicative of how you've done it in the past, is there's multiple sections of the stage where, like last year it was you had one section of what had just happened, a section where it is happening, and then a section where they're preparing. And then, like with the Ariana Grande performance, I think you had them extend across each section, so they were kind of breaking down and building as it was running. It was an incredible display of technical organization, and just it was incredible just to watch that all play out.
Yeah, I'm really proud of my team, and it wasn't necessarily the current team, all as great as they were, but I think, and I could be wrong, we were the first show to expand to 2 stages. We were the first show I know to expand to 3 stages by using what we call our little remote stage in the house. Although, as I think about it, to give credit where credit is due, the director that I worked with for many years on this show, Walter Miller, he actually, I think he was the one that suggested that, because I think he had done it. He also did the CMAs, and I think he may have done it on the CMAs the year before we started doing it, the satellite stage. So, but it opened up the show. I mean, before we had that, when we were doing the show on a single stage, which what we did for the first several years, we were trapped. I mean, we had to have X number of minutes in between performances. So in those days, if I had 12 or 13 performances, that was a lot, because I needed the time in between and give away awards and blah, blah, blah. When we went to the double or even more stages, then it was normal for us to do 19, 20 performances in a 3.5-hour show. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, it's like, so you have all this planning, but there's also this level of kind of having to go with things that come up and then improvising. I mean, I've read about, the reports that Celine Dion had to change within 24 hours when Barbra Streisand got the flu in the late 90s. And I remember the Adele performance, the second one in 2017, when she started the song. I think she, on the broadcast, she actually personally said to you, "I'm sorry, Ken, I have to restart." And then you just have to go with it, right?
There's times you don't necessarily need to be identified personally, but she was right to do it. She was absolutely right to do it. It was wrong, and she just I to this day, I believe, I think she just didn't get the note in her ear, so she was a key away from where that music track was. So she was right. She couldn't go on, and I don't know. I think there were a lot of people. She got the entire audience on her side because she did that. If she hadn't done that, she could have been open to people saying what was wrong with Adele. But now they said what was right with Adele. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Celine thing was curious. I mean, it was Barbara. She was going to do. They were going to do the duet that Barbara and Celine had recorded together. I can't remember. I think it was maybe called "Tell Him" or something. And we had created a set for it. David Foster was playing. Blah 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 blah. And Barbara wasn't coming in for the first rehearsal. So I was just going to rehearse the Celine side, and then morning of the show, Barbara was going to come in and do it, and then we were going to put together for the show day. And I got this call about 8:00 in the morning from Barbara's manager saying, "Barbara's sick, she can't do it. What are you going to do?" Maybe it happened the night before. I'm not sure. All I know is we wound up getting, what's his name? Guy from Canada who is one of her producers, whose name is right on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, we decided we had to change the song. And even though My Heart Will Go On was not eligible, was not nominated for a Grammy, that was what we decided to do. She couldn't do the duet song. So she actually performed that song, which then went on to win Record of the Year the following year, and rehearsed it. And by the way, over the course of, so So I had called Renee at about 8 o'clock that morning because he didn't know about this, and obviously he was with Celine. And I said, we need to fix this and blah blah blah. Anyway, so it happened very quickly, and then once it was fixed, then I got another call from Barbara's manager saying, "We think we can do this. Barbara's feeling better. She wants to do it. Can we do it?" I call Renee back. He says, "Of course we can," because that's the way they were. And then we said, "Okay, we're going to change horses once more." And then there was one more switch where, for the craziest reason, Barbara's hair people heard that she wasn't going to make it, and they're on a plane back to LA, and she can't do it without her hair and makeup. So that's why that didn't happen. And then, of course, Celine gave a kind of a brilliant performance. So things happen for a reason.
Yeah. Well, like in this last year, I mean, I remember being in the rehearsal and everybody looking at their phones and getting the news that Kobe Bryant had died. And it just rippled throughout. You could feel like the whole energy of the space changed. And I mean, I've read, just tangentially about how you had, kind of met with Alicia Keys to talk about how to pivot the night to really meet the moment.
It was, that goes into that pantheon of a dozen, what we could do now moments. She was amazing because she got it and understood that we had to do something. My team was great. Everybody just, instead of saying, "What are we going to do?" we said, "Okay, let's figure it out." David Wild was wonderful. We knew we had scripting to change. We knew we had other stuff to change. We knew we had staging to change. And I had to get through the dress, so we were just kind of doing double duty, and we were kind of figuring it out as we went along. It was her suggestion. Boyz II Men was there because they were with Tyler, and immediately, boom, let's do It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday, a cappella with her and them, and I think somebody else that I have. Yeah, come on, what's his name? Uncle Charlie Wilson. He was there, so he was a part of it. We built it out, and it was a touching moment that didn't exist 4 hours earlier, and it was brilliant and beautiful. And I moved what had been the opening of the show to the second act, so we could make that transition from the sadness and the moment of grief and mourning to, okay, now we have a show to do. Not quite so cavalierly, but that was the intent, and that was something that happened really because, number one, we had the right host, which, by the way, is very similar. And David and I and others who had experienced both remarked on that and continue to, how similar it was to the night that Whitney died, even though that was the day before that she passed away. And thank God for LL Cool J, who basically performed the same function in getting us through the whole show, but basically working with us to come up with the way to open that show. It's live television, nothing like it. It's just nothing like it.
So we just have a little bit of time left, but I really wanted to ask you this question because I think you have such a unique vantage point on artists at all stages in success. So you've worked with artists that have exploded very quickly, had a hit, and then been on the Grammys. You've been with artists that were successful and then maybe faded away, and then artists that maybe took a longer on ramp and have had a very long success. I'm curious if there's anything you've pulled away from that you've just observed about people that have really been able to go the distance, like things that you've seen them do in terms of just their music or anything, any kind of like takeaways that you've had on artists that have been able to have real success long-term in their career, just as from an observational standpoint.
You know what? I wish I could answer it in a glib way. The truth of the matter is, I don't get to know them that well on that kind of a level. To me, my joys come from their music and their talent, and trying to elevate that for television. There are artists that I'm very fond of because I think they They have made the right career choices. There are artists that I think have made the wrong career choices. I've seen artists that have changed from being reasonably decent people into ogres. And I've seen artists that have stayed just as genuine and wonderful as they were the first day I worked with them. Celine is an example. Nobody liked her, you know. It's not an easy question to answer, and there's no, I don't know that it's proper to go into that. I'm very fond of saying they're not your friends, and by the way, that's not a pejorative. It's just basically honest. So that, I don't go out to dinner with them very often, although I have. They don't invite me on their yachts very often. There are artists that I have a history with. I have a long history with Sting. I have a long history with Paul Simon. I have a long history with Herbie Hancock. I have a long history with, Justin Timberlake. I have a long history with, Alicia Keys. They're artists who we were there at the beginning with them. And if they don't really credit us with their success, they appreciate what we've done. So on that level, I feel really good about the artists that we work with. By the way, isn't addressing your question, but it's the only way that it really is the primary way that I view what I've done in context of who they are.
Absolutely. So Ken, just with the last few minutes we have, and we have a lot of students that are interested in entering the music, the media industry, and like you had mentioned about your own experience, aren't really quite sure what that entry point looks like. What would be a suggestion that you have taken away from your own career story that you would relay to them?
Well, it's what I do tell kids that I talk to. There's no one road, and usually they'll say, "Well, how did you get into it? How did you do it?" Well, again, I took a circuitous road. I was going to be a sports writer, and then I got into PR, and then I got into local TV, and then I started to, I think the one given that I love to say to kids is, don't be afraid to fail, because this is the time when failure is cheap. It just is. And, if you're 23 years old and getting out of school and you have to be a PA, a production assistant on a TV show, and that means you're running scripts or you're running coffee, you're going to do that for a while and you're going to pay your dues. And then if you're smart, somebody's going to say, the kid over there that was here at midnight when everybody else was gone, like that kid, let's give him a shot at this. Let's give him a shot at that. It is that in a way, it's a prehistoric business, or at least what I have done is what I've noticed. You have to start at the bottom. You just do. You're not going to start off being an engineer or a producer or an on-air talent or whatever. You might, and I'm not being critical, but yeah, there are TV stations in Chillicothe, Ohio. That maybe that's where you start. But the reality is, if you have ambition and drive, and if you want to someday play in the bigs, you got to work your way there. It doesn't happen automatically. I promise you this, but I won't guarantee it. You'll get your break. You have to make it, but you will get it. But you really have to kind of work for it. You gotta do what you can do to get there, and then you'll find that there are plenty of rewards. And once you do kind of get to a certain level, you will appreciate it that much more because of, quote, your humble beginnings. I think people laugh at me now because I'll say, I remember when I was making $75 a week. I made $75 a week for my first year out of school. And by the way, I put away $10 a week on that $75 a week. So anyway, it can be a wonderful life. It's rewarding. If you're creative, your creativity will be discovered. It will be discovered.
It's great, Ken. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. It's been great having you here, and we look forward to hearing you with some artists here later today.
Sure. Good luck with everything with this, and it's been a pleasure. And give my regards to everybody back there. I really enjoyed talking to you.